Claire and I both had opportunities where we said, why are we doing this? Why are we carrying on? And what really keeps you going is when you see people say, this has literally changed my life. To just read those customer comments and go, that's why we do it. We do it because it's genuinely life-changing for people. And that's what helps you get up the next morning and go, okay, we're going to move on from this. And actually, we're going to succeed in spite of all the people who are trying to tear us down and who are lying about us and all this kind of stuff. And you go, actually, we're going to rise above that, because the thing that keeps us going is the tens of thousands of customers that are out there going, I love this thing. And you've created something that really brings a lot of value to me.
Hi everyone, I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and you are listening to episode 210 of the Startup Playbook podcast, a weekly series where I sit down with successful tech founders, investors, and operators to unpack their journey, lessons, and insights to help current and future entrepreneurs. The voice that you heard a little bit earlier was that of our guest for this episode, James Fuller. James is the co-founder and CEO of Hnry. Hnry automates taxes for sole traders, so they never have to worry about taxes ever again. The company started through spreadsheets that James and his wife and co-founder Claire built to solve their own problems. Those spreadsheets were then sent to their friends, who passed it on to their friends, before James and Claire realized that there was a real business opportunity underneath those basic spreadsheets. Fast forward to today, and Hnry has raised over $60 million in funding, has 150 staff across 3 countries, and annually processes $2.6 billion in payments across Australia and New Zealand. In this interview, we covered a wide range of topics, including the advantages that come from being a husband and wife founding team, the opportunities and challenges that come from being first to market, how the value of fairness is embedded not just into their company culture, but also their pricing strategy, how James and Claire have overcome some of the more challenging periods of their business, including times when they've both decided to quit the business, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with James Fuller. Hi, James. Welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
James, very excited about what you and Hnry have built, but for those people that may not be as familiar with you and your story, do you want to share a little bit about your background and what got you here today?
Sure. So back in, probably about 7-8 years ago, my co-founder and I found ourselves self-employed. We were contractors, freelancers, doing hourly rate work. And we were just blown away by how difficult it was to actually find out how much money was ours. You know, the traditional accounting industry is not well set up for people earning as individuals. It's all very much sort of geared towards small companies. And we made a couple of spreadsheets to make our lives easier, and then sort of fell into this idea of helping other people with it. And we've grown Hnry over the last 7 or 8 years to now become, the best way to describe it is it's an all-in-one accountancy service that is your accountant. It handles all of your payments, as well as providing you bespoke software to run your business that's right-sized for sole traders and independent operators. So it's a sort of a fantastic tool for those who are, whether you're a freelancer, a tradie, a contractor, you're in real estate. If you're not running a small enterprise, you don't need a company structure, then that's what Hnry is.
Yeah, amazing. And you did breeze past this, but your co-founder is also your wife, Claire.
Yeah, wife/co-founder, co-founder/wife. And I always follow that up with whichever way round it is, I just got it wrong. But yeah, I think, it's an interesting thing. People always say, oh, that must be quite difficult, working with your significant other. But I think it's actually one of the keys to success of the business is actually, having someone alongside you who is on exactly the same journey, both at home and at work.
Yeah. I saw a tweet the other day or a message on LinkedIn where I think someone said there's a significantly high proportion of unicorns that have come up from this side of the world that have, co-founders that are partners or like related as well. When you say it's kind of one of the things that have made it so successful, do you mind kind of sharing a little bit of what that sort of looks like from the inside?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think so for a start, one of the things that I think that founders in particular can struggle with if you're a founding team is the sort of divergence of priorities of founders. Different founders want to do different things, and founding groups obviously quite notably sometimes find themselves at sort of a bit of a disagreement of where to go next and what to do. Whereas actually when you're in business with your significant other, there's so much alignment on what you're trying to achieve, what the vision is, and there's so much of you just in that business, so much of the two of you or the multiples of you. And I think it's such an interesting thing to look at where founding relationships break down. And for a lot of times, everyone will know, particularly early stages of a startup business, things are very, very difficult. There's a high amount of sort of tolerance required. People require a huge amount of resilience. And one of the things I think for Claire and I that's been really valuable is actually having that other person there to help pick you up when things are very, very difficult. And if you imagine, I couldn't imagine being in a situation of Claire being on this amazing journey and having these opportunities and sort of founding this, amazing, fast growing tech startup, and to not be on that journey and to be in my own career journey, which is, could be very, very different. Maybe I'm still working a, traditional 9 to 5 job, and it would create so much difference between us in terms of the stresses we were under and the things we had to do. And I think actually having both of us on that journey has actually made it much better for both of us, rather than one of us feeling like we were maybe missing out on some rocket ship, or we were just the sort of, person behind the scenes to someone else's success. Actually, we can sit there and say, actually, we both did this as a couple. We made this, and it's a success because of the fact that we were fully aligned and still are in terms of where we want to take this business.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And I think, one of the challenges, as you said, one of the most common reasons why startups don't succeed is because of co-founder breakups. And I guess if you have that sort of alignment, as you mentioned, I think it's tough to find a stronger alignment in terms of both sort of wanting the same outcome outside of a marriage.
Oh, but don't get me wrong. It's not like, I'm not saying it's the easiest thing in the world. Like, I think, some of our early staff will remember sort of 6, 7, 8 years ago, maybe, Claire and I's first sort of disagreements about things at work, which, in a room full of 5 of us, when 2 of us are, disagreeing about, whether a button should be yellow or green, or whether it goes on the left or on the right of the screen, that's uncomfortable for everybody. And I think one of the things that Claire and I have had to learn is actually how to work closely together in a way that means we can disagree. And, it's that thing of, you can disagree, but you must commit. And to do that in a way that, for the most part, doesn't impact our personal lives. And we won't say we get it right 100% of the time. And, we've had our ups and downs in terms of both the business and relationship. But I think it's really important that it's, almost when you've got that relationship and that strength of bond, that, when one of you is having a bad day and, early on is having that resilience tested, to know that you're getting up the next morning and the 2 of you are going back in to make that work. Because, it's worth working through the difficulties of doing that. But I know it's not for everyone. And some people say to me, oh, I couldn't imagine spending that much time with my significant other. But for us, it's certainly been, part of the success.
Yeah, and I think what you kind of said about learning to disagree is really important, whether that's a co-founder relationship or that relationships outside of that. What does that sort of look like for the 2 of you? Because, I guess if you don't have that sort of dynamic, there is always that sort of separation of being able to go home and, in a sense, having someone to vent to about what's going on at work. I imagine that that's like a lot more kind of difficult. How do you sort of find that separation of the disagreements with work and being able to sort of separate that out with your sort of personal life?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because Claire and I don't significantly disagree on a lot of stuff these days. But I think what's really interesting is, you refer to, everyone does this. You go home with your partner and you have a little bit of a rant and you say, this is what happened today. And we're in this really unique and quite odd situation that the person that you're ranting to has the power and the opportunity to make that change for you. And so you almost have to hold back a little bit. Like, if I'm ranting to Claire, because we're problem solvers, her first thought will be, okay, how do I solve this problem? And she will say, okay, well, why don't you do this and I'll do this? And it makes it much more difficult. If you're ranting to someone who doesn't really know your coworkers, who doesn't work at the same organization, they can't stroll into the office the next day and go, cool, I see what's happening here, I'm going to make that change. And so having those work discussions at home, you almost have to temper that natural tendency to try and solve the problem, and actually, sit there and say, well, look, is this something that you want my help with? Or is this something that you're just having a rant because it's Wednesday and things haven't been that great? And so you don't get that in normal couples that come home and have those rants to each other. And so where we sort of don't usually take that opportunity to do that, and then have the other person come in and sort of try and solve the problem. But what we do have is very kind of clearly delineated responsibilities. So we don't sort of buy into the sort of co-CEO model. It's very much like, well, Claire is the COO. She runs the operations of the business, huge expanse of the sort of customer facing side of what we do. people and culture, huge amount there. And then I tend to take on the sort of engineering, sales and marketing responsibility, sitting across our head of engineering, head of marketing, quite a lot on the product side. And so by splitting the responsibility for the organization almost down the middle, we very much got used to sort of almost deferring to each other and saying, if I've got questions about the operations side of the business, it's really something for Claire to make the decision. And you kind of have that point of what is my sort of remit and where am I, the sort of decision maker versus where am I just someone who might be consulted or informed on a particular part of things. And whilst I might have an opinion, whereas in the past when things were much smaller, it was very easy to sort of disagree and say, oh, I think we should go this way, or I think we should do this thing. Like once you've got delineated responsibilities, like you can have your opinion, but you don't have any, you're trusting that the other person is going to make the right decision on behalf of the business, regardless of whether they're your spouse or not. You're doing the same thing with your leadership team, right? You're saying, we're trusting you to be that proxy that's going to make decisions in the best way. And all I can do is provide some thoughts into it and maybe get those taken into account.
Well, how early into the piece did you sort of come to that delineation? Was that pretty much?
This will be like a couple of years ago. It was not early doors. I think as with any founder's relationship, when you start to work together, you really have to learn those idiosyncrasies. Like what are the stress triggers for the other people or person? What are the characteristics of the way that they work, and how can you work best as a team together? And I think for Claire and I, it has certainly evolved over the years. Many years ago when we first started, it was I would have these crazy ideas about things we were going to do, and then Claire would be the kind of executor that would just kind of make that stuff happen and make it work. And I think actually we've probably become closer to the sort of center of that scale together over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, whereby I'm tempering some of the crazy ideas with a little bit more realism, and Claire's probably coming out of her comfort zone a little bit more in terms of pushing for more. So I think it's a constant evolution as you evolve as founders, and I think a lot of founding teams will be in that same position where, because your job changes continually as the business grows, you have to change your style. You have to change how you approach problem solving, and you can't do the same things that you did in 2017. Now there's a team of people around you that you're there to empower, and they're the ones who need to go and take those decisions. So it's almost a constant evolution over time of changing who you are as a founder and the kind of role that you play.
Yeah. And for those of our listeners that may not be as familiar with Hnry, do you want to give our listeners an idea of the scale of the company at the current moment?
Sure. So we have been going we launched in New Zealand, sort of bootstrapped for a year or so, and then launched in New Zealand in 2018. Started bootstrapping in Australia in 2020 and sort of launched in 2021. We've now recently launched in the UK market. So we're across those 3 territories. We are around 150 staff. We process about $2.7 billion annualized on behalf of our customers. We've raised about $65-70 million in capital over the last sort of 6 years or so, and have become one of the largest accountancies in Australia and New Zealand, serving tens of thousands of sole trader customers and taking all of the stress and anxiety out of tax and payments for them.
And that's a far cry from, I guess, your starting point, which you touched on earlier, which is, you guys sort of essentially launched with a bunch of spreadsheets that I believe that you created for yourself and then shared out with your friends.
Yeah, it just started from Claire and I, very much kind of spreadsheet people. It started from that personal pain of, how do we work out how much money is ours? And so Claire and I created a couple of spreadsheets, and really, this was probably about 2015. We thought nothing of it. We didn't have aspirations to build a business from this. It was very much, how do we solve our own problem? We've got 2 young kids. How do we make sure we know how much we can have for a family holiday or for some home renovations or whatever it might be? And the traditional accounting model is so broken. This idea that an accounting professional tells you to put aside some percentage of your income, some generic percentage, and then in the future they will come and tell you how much of that you need to spend on tax, just seemed crazy to us. And I would say to my traditional accountant, so Gareth, a friend of mine at the time, and I would say, what is my tax rate? And he would say, oh, I can't tell you until the end of the year. But I'd say, but how much I'm earning, how much I'm roughly spending. Why can't you even give me a ballpark? And he would say, I'll just put, a third or whatever it is of your income aside, and one day I will come for you. And we started a couple of spreadsheets, and that made it a lot easier to track in real time how much was ours and how much was for tax. And yeah, over time, as other people found out we had these spreadsheets, they asked to use them. And yeah, it came to about late 2016, early 2017, where Claire and I sat there and said, well, we've got all these people asking for these spreadsheets. Maybe we're not the dumb ones here. Maybe there's something here that people would like to have more real-time cash flow effectively, and say, actually, if I have all the money that's in my pocket is after tax and has all my deductions already applied to it, I can go and spend or save with impunity. And that's really where we started. And over the years have built out from what was effectively a nice way of people working out their tax liability to now what is a tax agency in its own right, an accountancy. We have all our tailored software. We process billions of dollars in payments, but very much all sort of rooted in that core problem that we wanted to solve, which was actually allowing people like us, sole traders, to go out and earn without any of the headaches that come with sort of admin, because no one wants to do admin. I mean, okay, I think there are a couple of people out there who would say, I love doing my admin, it's therapeutic. But for the vast majority of people, having to be forced to do admin, having to download apps that help you do your admin, it's just crazy. It's like nobody wants to do admin, and yet so many software companies kind of promote the fact of like, hey, come over here and do your admin, whereas actually our whole ethos is, we'll just do it for you. We'll take that full stack. There's no reconciliations, there's no categorization that you have to do. It's all, as much as possible, is automated, or our team will do it for you. And that's really the idea, is that you shouldn't have to worry about this stuff and worry if you're getting things right and categorizing things right, because actually you have professional accountants that do that for you.
We're going to take a very quick break from this podcast to talk about one of our partners, Vanta. So if you're building a SaaS business and want to quickly unlock growth and build customer trust, one way to do this is by achieving compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, CPS 234, Essential 8, or other in-demand compliance frameworks. However, this process is often time-intensive and very costly. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance, making you audit-ready quickly and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. And not only that, Vanta scales with your business. With a market-leading trust management platform to help you continuously monitor compliance, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. You can join over 8,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, and Indebted that use Vanta to build trust and prove security in real time. As a listener of the show, you can get up to $1,000 US off Vanta when you head over to vanta.com/demo. All right, let's get back to the episode. And, obviously you kind of spoke a little bit earlier to the point that you're at and all of the success that you've had. And, in hindsight, it kind of seems obvious what you're doing, but I imagine that
way to underplay it, but yeah, no, it does.
Exactly. I imagine back in 2015, 2016, as you're showing these spreadsheets and kind of getting that feedback, there's so many different paths that this could have gone down. I guess what was the sort of inflection point, if any, for you guys to sort of realize that there was something really there? And then what did that sort of process look like to go, actually, let's see if this is something that we can turn into a business?
I suppose that inflection point was really, it was people seeing people experience the same problem as us. And around sort of late 2016, I was working in the startup community here in New Zealand, doing kind of, I'm a former management consultant, reformed management consultant, I would say, and started working in the startup community. And when you are around people who are taking those chances to try and create something from nothing, and they are seeing something in the market and feel that they have a solution to that problem, that feeling is infectious. And I think when you're inspired by others who are on the same journey to say, well, actually, perhaps we do have something here. We have enough of a sense from the people we're speaking to that this is a potential gap, at least for a small part of the market that we're aware of. Why would we not take the opportunity to go out and validate this thing? And so our process very much was, start of 2017 was spin up a one-page website, put $100 into Twitter advertising to see if other people would, resonate with the problem we were solving. And then we've really just grown it organically from there. And as we've brought on customers, we've been so in tune and receptive to customers' needs that all of the things that we do in our platform are all based on what our customers are asking for and the sort of direction we can see them heading in terms of their business. So rolling out things like the Hnry debit card that automates the creation of expenses for your business, or rolling out sort of online payments at no extra cost. So all of these things that we build in that we don't charge our customers any more for. We literally say, well, actually, this is all part of you being able to run an effective business and to have certainty over whatever money is in your pocket is yours to keep. And so the process has always been customer led, and never sort of, hey, let's go copy these people, or we've seen this in a different country, let's go and do that thing there. It's been very much, hey, there's a problem here that we want to solve for a lot of people. Let's really truly engage with them and work out what the best way to solve the problem is for them without burdening them with additional admin.
And I imagine sort of part of that solution of trying to find the best way to solve this problem for people was solving things in a way that hadn't really been done before. And again, from what I understand, you actually had to go to lawyers to figure out whether this was legal in terms of what you were proposing.
Well, we tried. Yeah, we tried to go to lawyers. I think that's the interesting thing when you are taking an approach that you haven't found evidence of other people having done so. We did what you would do as conscientious founders. You said, well, we'll engage the services of a lawyer. And I remember Claire and I turned up, and actually, I think the lawyer might even have been in this very building up on the 4th floor. And we sat down with them and said, hey, we've got this business idea, and we want to, we want to handle other people's taxes. We effectively want to pay other people's taxes on their behalf. Is that legal? And I remember this lawyer just saying, well, I've never heard of anyone doing this, and I have no idea if there's any precedent that allows you to do this. And so then it was on us to say, well, if there's nothing there, we can't find anything that says we can't do it, but we also can't see any precedent for other people doing it. So let's actually just take that approach that, well, we believe we can, and certainly under the regulatory environment that we later fell into, it's perfectly possible. But what's interesting now is that, we're 8 years down the line, and we're now seeing kind of copycat businesses springing up with the same sort of marketing angle as we had 8 years ago. None of the feature set, but very much trying to say, well, actually, this is a thing now, which is weird. And, some of our investors refer to it as being sort of category defining. But certainly we've had to battle through quite a lot of the sort of building social proof in a market and actually showing people what this thing is. Because before Hnry came along, no one was Googling for, is there an all-in-one service that takes care of all of my payments and my invoicing and does all my taxes, and is my accountant? That just didn't exist in people's heads. So we've had to educate people that actually such a thing existed, and put ourselves out there in the market to say, well, you didn't know that such a full stack service existed, and now it does.
Well, and I think, again, very easy to sort of underplay the work that goes into educating the market and sort of overcoming some of those roadblocks. Again, do you mind sharing what some of the challenges were and how you sort of went about addressing them?
Oh, sure. I mean, one of the hardest things when you start off with is when you're doing something different, particularly for a quite traditional market like accountancy. Accountants have a tendency to fear the unknown, or rather there's a large swathe of them that fear the unknown. And, when Xero first came out 25 years ago, however long it was now, a lot of the accounting industry said, no, we will never adopt this. This is we don't like this change. It's not something we want. And, now look at them. They're all down at the front of the stadium waving foam fingers around and celebrating this software. But at the time, it was very much something that they were quite fearful of in the way that it would change their industry. And we and we still do run up against that kind of inertia on a regular basis, where traditional accountants, or some of them at least, will say, we don't like what Hnry does. And, we once had, I remember doing many years ago now, I did an interview on the radio for, we run a lot of surveys and polls to sole traders, and we provide a lot of this insight back out into the market. And I was on one of the radio stations, and after I came off air, they shared with me an email that said, how dare you? Oh, I think it started long time listener, first time emailer, that classic trope. And they said, how dare you give James Fuller and Hnry any airtime? I'm an accountant, and I've had firsthand experience of his accountancy stealing my clients. And so the radio station forwarded it to me, and they said, look, do you have any response for this listener of ours? And I had to go back and said, look, I'm sorry to say, I didn't sneak in at night and steal their customers. Their customers moved to us because we were providing a superior service at a better price point with a larger feature set with higher levels of customer service. But that doesn't stop the traditional accounting industry from seeing us as being this, this behemoth that comes in and steals people's clients. Whereas actually, if when you look at our Google reviews and the satisfaction people get from using our service, people are coming to us because we provide a level of service that's better. But on a regular basis, we're on the receiving end of complaints from accountants. They leave fake Google reviews for us saying, pretending to be customers and all this kind of stuff. And that's, whilst I don't like the word disruption, that's just par for the course when you come in and do things differently in a market, is that people try and stamp out the new thing and they say, no, we don't like this. And we're now in a position where actually quite a few of the progressive accountancies out there are referring people through to Hnry, and they're saying, hey, if you're a sole trader and you're an individual tradie, freelancer, whatever, my services are probably not going to be cost effective for you. You would be better using Hnry. And should you get to the point in future that you have the kind of complexity that requires a limited liability company, so you're, I don't know, taking on staff or multiple shareholders, or you're looking to scale your business and take on a significant amount of debt, they're like, look, you can come back to me when you get to that level of complexity, but there's really no need for those kind of structures and until that time. So it's been a very much an uphill battle both in Australia and in New Zealand to show the rest of the accounting industry that we're not doing anything different or in any way it's sort of strangely. We've just taken the manual labor tasks that the accounting industry does and applied a software lens across them, and got ourselves to a point where actually people get a higher level of service because we're not there asking them to send us all their paper receipts in a shoebox. And actually what we can do with the time saving is actually spend time talking to them and understanding their situation without having to bill them every 5 minutes we speak to them.
I imagine for a lot of our listeners who are potentially in their startup building something new for the first time, it can be really hard to know whether the traction isn't quite there in the way that they sort of expect to see it, because they, it's just an education piece and, the market will essentially catch up at a particular point, or whether this is actually not the right thing or the right time for their particular business. And it's a relatively tough question. It's a case-by-case scenario. But again, any advice from your perspective on how founders should think about that or approach that if they're in that situation?
I think the fundamental is to listen to the customers, because they'll tell you and they'll guide you on this journey. And if you have a group of customers that is increasing, doesn't necessarily have to be the steepest hockey stick in the world, but you have an increasing group of customers who are excited about your service, that are telling other people about that service. And even in the embarrassing MVP phase where, you've put your product out there and it's not what you actually want it to be, but you're there to sort of testing it and measuring. If you are still in a position where the pain is great enough for your customers that they're willing to wear some of the sort of difficulty in the early stages of your service, then that gives you a good leading indicator that as you grow, it's just a case of more people gaining awareness. Whereas if you're finding that customers are maybe excited but not converting, or they're converting but not staying, or they're staying but not advocating, then it might be an opportunity to actually examine whether or not the product market fit is there, or whether you're going to break through whatever the sort of inertia barrier is in that industry. But it's very much it's so vital to put your customers at the center of that, and not only to understand that your first customers are not going to be your sort of majority customers, they're going to be your early adopters, but to actually understand sort of as you grow, are we breaking these things through? And okay, great. It's always a badge of honor where the incumbent in a market tries to sort of, I don't know, throw some shade your way. But actually, are you finding that your customers defend you? When the copycats turn up in the market and try and slam you with attack ads, are your customers there going, actually, they provide a superior service? Like, it's always those signals that you get from your customers that tell you whether or not you're breaking through. And sometimes it will just take time and building up trust signals. I mean, I know it's taken us a good few years in the New Zealand market to have a name that is synonymous with kind of trustworthiness for sole traders. In Australia, we're getting there. I think last year we kind of broke through that barrier, but it's not something that happens overnight, particularly for fintech businesses. You need to be a long-standing business. I mean, we've been in Australia since 5 years now. We've been there, and New Zealand coming on 8 years. And there are still people who haven't quite heard of us. And whilst in your own little world, you're like, how can that be? Because we do a lot of advertising. It takes a long time to to get out there into the sort of consumer mind, and so people know who you are, and build that level of trust where people go, actually, yeah, Hnry is sort of Australasia's largest accountancy, and I trust them to handle my funds and to do my taxes to a really high standard. And that's just an ongoing journey of continuing to prove that trustworthiness with people by demonstrating really high quality.
I think that sort of trustworthiness, as you mentioned, especially in fintech, but I think in all businesses is really, really important with your customers. And it can be easy, like you said, when you're just so laser focused on your business and kind of have that particular worldview that you believe everyone should know about the business in 6 months or a year. I think it's helpful to have some context of like this is a multi-year sort of journey in terms of doing that. But are there any particular ways that you think about measuring that, and anything that you do sort of proactively to help accelerate that? Or, I guess from your perspective, is that just a time?
Some of it is time, but we find, and we never started out doing this, but we found that our customers did it for us, that the number of sort of friends and family referrals, we could see from the data that it was so high. So at the moment, I think it currently runs between Australia and New Zealand about, I think, 40 to 45% of all signups say they first heard about us from friends and family. And so actually that's a lot of, what really sells it for us. Like I get advertised so much stuff on Facebook and Instagram and everything else. And whilst that might be a slick advert, really the thing that I believe is if my friend, someone I trust, turns around to me and says, do you know what's really good? These things. And I go, oh, brilliant. That's someone who's experienced those things before. And I think that's where I think for our service, we can not only measure that, but also we can encourage that, which is actually, people telling each other. I think that's it's something that is so vital, that when your customers are such large advocates that they're saying, hey, I use this thing, I've used it for years, it is excellent, the team are fantastic, the apps, we've got loads of features or whatever. That's the sort of thing that you can point to and say, well, we can invest in that. We can work with our customers and keep delivering value for them. There's that thing of, if you have a sort of that net promoter score, which ours is, I think it's around 70 to 75 net promoter score, which is world class. It's ridiculous. But that's because we're providing like real value to our clients, such that they go out and they want to tell other people about it, not because they're getting some kind of reward or kickback or, some kind of slush money in their back pocket. They're telling them because they're like, hey, actually, you need this. This is a life-changing thing. This is something that's really beneficial. And so for us, we measure a lot of what we do based on how customers respond to our service, down to the ratings they give the conversations with our customer support team when they're asking questions, or whether it's NPS or how they heard about us. All of these metrics, we're data obsessed as a business, but as a lot of founders are, but we use all those metrics to build a picture of, actually, are we doing right by our customers, and what's the level of trustworthiness we have, and how do we ensure maximum trustworthiness? Which, in one of the examples of this is, I remember in our first couple of years, our pricing model, which is a percentage of revenue pricing model, a little bit like tax. So we take 1% of income up to a maximum of $1,500 in Australia and New Zealand, which is priced under what the cost of a usual traditional accountant would be, plus software. But in our first couple of years, we had a slightly different pricing model. We did that classic thing of, there are 3 different prices. There's like the 1%, there's the 3%, and there's the 6%, and they have different feature sets. And the 3% is the most popular. It's that classic SaaS trope. And what we found after a little while was that we looked at the money we were making from clients, and quite a few of them were on the most popular plan because they defaulted into it. And we got to the end of it must have been 18 months or something, and we looked at some of the numbers and said, people are paying too much for this. And we said, it's not actually fair. And that's, Claire and I are very kind of like steadfastly founded with this idea of fairness. And we said, it's not fair. This is too much of a price for them to pay for the value that they're getting. And so we decided to reduce our prices. And we reduced from 3% down to 1%. And our customers couldn't believe it, because they were like, we would have paid more, and you've gone the other way, and you've actually reduced the price of your service because you felt that it wasn't fair. And then we continued to tweak our pricing, where we used to have a cap of $2,000. We then went down to $1,500, even though we were adding more things to the platform. But it was that idea of, actually, it's only fair that we provide something that sits at the right level in market. And compared to, often we get sort of, I suppose, inaccurately compared to standalone accounting software. I mean, we do quite a lot more than that, but often we get compared to software, and people say, well, the software providers have raised their prices 17 times in the last 3 to 4 years. Whereas actually we go the other way, which is we build in more value and say, actually, well, what's a fair price? And, we haven't changed our price in, I think, like 5 or 6 years now. And that level of consistency is really what drives it home for our customers. The more we build into the product, we're not changing those prices. And that means that the value we provide, the comparative value, just continues to drive value for money. And compared to other services where your accountant is upping their rates and your software is increasing its monthly SaaS fees, it really resonates for customers about actually being with a business that values fairness.
Yeah, I was actually about to ask about your pricing model because it's very different to the way that traditional businesses kind of think about generating revenue from their customers. And oftentimes I think a lot of founders assume, especially when they go on and raise venture capital funding, that, that they need to show like particular types of unit economics or like operate the business in a particular way. I'd love to kind of understand, when you're kind of making those pricing decisions, what does that look like when you're engaging with that, not just at a company level, but at a board level, and kind of engaging with your investors and telling that story as you sort of raise future rounds of funding?
I mean, it's fascinating. What we've learned over the years is that obviously none of our current investors and shareholders are in this bucket, but there are people that you talk to who cannot see beyond a blinkered subscription SaaS model world. And, our unit economics are incredibly strong when you look at our, average revenue per user, you look at our gross margin, which is incredibly high. But what happens is often you talk to potential investors who basically they all have a model, and they take your cohort data and they dump it into the model and they look at it and they go, I don't understand. Because we have customers who maybe start off slow with us, but because of the fact that we're supporting them in building their business, they suddenly increase their revenue over time, and they become sort of more profitable, not because we've upsold them a whole bunch of product, but because we've enabled them to develop and deliver a better business. And yeah, what we found is that some of the investors just can't get their heads around it. It's only in the minority, but actually you need to tell that story, which is, by pricing fairly and pricing proportionately, you provide an opportunity for people to feel like they're paying their fair share. And that's that's a bit like tax itself, right? Everyone pays their fair share. And the big thing for us is not pricing out people in the market who have traditionally been priced out by kind of predatory accounting software, traditional accountants, and to actually democratize access to self-employment, to say actually we want anyone to be able to earn in a sort of an affordable and accessible way without any of the stresses that go with it. But it has posed some interesting questions. Obviously, our board is very well versed in where our revenue comes from, our unit economics, everything else. But certainly new investors that we court, some of the first things we have to take them on the journey of is actually, this is how our revenue model works. And here you can see based on the data how profitable customers are, but you need to take them on that journey of like, hey, this is not B2B SaaS that is global from day one, and we're going to just keep upping our prices every 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I imagine that that's a really great way to sort of filter for alignment with investors as well, in terms of the type of company that you're trying to build and your kind of core values. I guess taking that sort of similar lens, one of the people that I spoke to as part of the research process for this interview was Karan Anand, who is your country manager for Australia and also your chief strategy officer. And one of the things that he mentioned to me was almost 10% of your staff of 150 people or so are related in some way. So either they're family members or, someone kind of connected, which I think, is such a testament to, I think if you're really unhappy in your workplace, you're not going to want the people that you surround yourself with or the people that you care about the most to want to come and work for you as well. So I think it's a great signal for the culture that you've kind of built. But, how do you sort of think about culture at Hnry, and particularly given that now you've got about 150 staff across 3 countries. What does that sort of look like in being able to expand that out from where you're generally located in New Zealand to being able to translate that across different countries as well?
I mean, I will say that I can't take any credit for the culture side of things at all. That's very much Claire's bag, but I can talk to how Claire envisions culture. And her and I are both so steadfastly aligned on this that it's very much not only like founded in fairness, but very much based on the idea of building a place that people want to come into every day. Because we're an in-office business, we value the face-to-face interactions that we have, but it's very much a business where we want to provide clear frameworks for people to progress through their careers, where actually there isn't just one linear job path, that actually someone can start off in one area of the business and can move across, and that we have what Claire calls a kind of pay parity model. So regardless of sort of role or gender or demographics or other factors, everyone is remunerated equivalently at that level in the business. And we're very public internally with all of our salary banding levels, and people have a very clear view on what are the things that they need to do, the goals they need to hit in order to go up in that framework. And so, Claire and I have both discussed this at length, that, we both had long careers before starting Hnry. We'd worked in a number of different places. And when we started off down this journey, it was very much about how do we take the best of all of the places that we've worked, consider the worst of all the places we've worked, and say, let's never do that, and create an environment that does lend itself well to, whether it's not taking yourself too seriously, or a culture of continuous improvement and low ego, which is very, very important to us. But actually to be in a position where you create an environment where when there are new job openings available and you put it out to people and you say, hey, do you have anyone who you think would be good? I remember a couple of years ago, even, we would put this out, and sometimes we would say, do you have members of your family? Do you have other people? And I remember the number of people who said, one of our earliest staff members, Sammy, I remember saying to her, we said to her, do you have another one of you at home? And she was like, well, I've got my sister Stace, and she's actually, she's very similar, but she's currently working somewhere else. And the number of people who refer those friends and family into Hnry, and it's because they know that this is an organization that values that fairness and provides career opportunities and the associated remuneration, share scheme, whatever that might be, and that it's not a place that is trying to make everyone work 60 hours a week. It's actually a place where we value work-life balance, and we value everyone kind of enjoying coming to work rather than dragging themselves in the morning. And I think it's that constant need to refine the culture whilst retaining the core values. But as we scale, we're now in a situation where we've got a bunch of folks from our New Zealand office who are wanting to go over to the UK. And so rather than leave Hnry, they're just going to go and carry on their work and do it in the UK office, because the culture is so equivalent between the Wellington office, the Sydney office, and the London office, that there's not going to be that culture shock. It might just be a smaller microcosm of the wider culture, but it's very much equivalent between the offices and allows people to move in between. That means we don't need to lose good people just because they happen to want to go traveling.
Sender is the OG startup accounting firm in Australia, catering to all stages of your business life. If you're busy running a business, you don't always have the time to do your own books and forecasts, and instead you can fully outsource your finance function so that you have the time and resources back to do what you do best, which is growing your business. They have a dedicated focus on founders, funds, and startups, and have an experienced team that can help you with everything from managing your tax to balancing your books to even helping with your exit strategy. I trust and use them with all of my businesses and can't recommend them highly enough. To find out more or to speak to Gareth and the team, head over to sender.com. All right, let's get back to this episode. And you kind of spoke about, finding your own sort of version of work-life balance. I remember in a previous conversation, you told me about a story where you were at hospital with your sort of eldest being on your knee, and she kind of saw your phone sort of going off all the time and asked you if that's how, often that your phone goes off. I guess, how do you sort of think about that, given both you and Claire are clearly sort of very passionate and driven and motivated, and have very wild ambitions for what you want to achieve with Hnry, while being able to sort of balance that with, having family life and kids. What does that sort of look like for you, and how do you sort of translate that across the culture for the company?
Well, I mean, I will be honest and say in the first couple of years, it was very difficult to have that balance. Between Claire and I, we were working the kind of 60-hour weeks, literally every hour under the sun. I don't think our two girls enjoyed that very much at all. They weren't, they were probably they felt like Hnry was a third child in the family. But I think as we've, certainly with that instance that I think was, probably two and a bit years after we'd started, where Isabel was sat with me in the doctor's office, and even though my phone was off, you could just hear it vibrating, you could feel it going. I reached a point myself where I recognized that I had to make a change because both Claire and I had been such kind of linchpins to the business that we were still getting notified about every Slack message, every email, all of these sorts of things. And gradually over the last few years, I've been on a bit of a personal journey trying to extract myself from being a bottleneck for things and actually becoming less kind of responsive to things coming in, and whether that means managing your notifications or trying to find times to switch off. I think we're a lot better now as the two of us of actually making sure we've got that time for the kids and making sure we have that work-life balance. And that might mean, working on a Sunday morning before anyone's up, or it might mean, particularly with the UK, we find ourselves doing meetings in the evening. It's about kind of getting that flexibility. But certainly I say in the first 2 or 3 years of Hnry, you kind of don't have that option. You don't have the option to say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to kick back at 2 p.m. and we're just going to clock off for the day and don't worry about it, whereas, because you're in the trenches and there's only 5 of you in the business and you can't have productivity go down by 20%. And so it is not an easy road to go down with small children, but it's something that we've greatly improved in the last few years, and even down to where we're at the moment in our lovely office here in Wellington. We have a kids room where we have a couple of arcade games and a Nintendo Switch and lots of activities for kids. And so what we find is, rather than having our staff have to go to daycare or go to school and then kind of have to commute home, if the kids have got a dentist appointment in town, they just park up in our kids room. And actually all of the kids of Hnry staff quite enjoy coming in and hanging out together. And I think my youngest and some friends took over a meeting room a while ago. But it's that idea that work-life balance doesn't have to be either you're in one place or the other. It's actually about creating an environment where, if there's a teacher-only day, we've got a whole bunch of kids running around and no one cares, because actually it's quite nice, it's quite vibrant, it's quite fun, and actually it sort of keeps everyone a little bit honest when you've got kids roaming around. But it's our kids especially will, after school, they can come down to the office and kind of let themselves in, and it's just so nice to be in that position from maybe where we were very early on, where we barely had the time to get out to go and pick them up from school, and they're always in after school programs. So yeah, it's not been the easiest road, and I think it's the same for any either sort of combined or single parents. To manage what is a startup business with parenting is very, very difficult. And I think it's, again, I don't think it gets talked about enough, which is how you cope as a parent when it comes to the sort of stresses of startup life, whilst also trying to bring up children. Claire and I have a current problem, which is, and for quite a while now, we don't have any sort of local childcare. So if there's an event that comes up, it's basically one of us can go and the other person has to stay at home. And so a lot of the time, because I do a lot of the sort of more outwardly facing stuff for the business, it would be Claire will say, hey, look, you go along to that thing. But when you don't have availability of childcare, you're kind of splitting your time and say, well, who gets to go to this thing? Or you have to bring the children with you, which is just something that I think some of the team is used to, is just, having our kids around, seeing as we're both in the business.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, I couldn't agree more with the sentiment that you can only have one or the other, that to build something successful, you have to give up absolutely everything in your life. And similarly, if you're taking care of yourself, it means that you can't be ambitious and with work. And that's exactly what we're trying to address with the Como Club as well. So I think what you and Claire are doing are a great example of kind of integrating that into both worlds. James, I guess one final point, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier as well, in terms of the support that you and Claire sort of provide to each other. I think it's very easy looking at a business like Hnry and all of the success that you've had to just assume that it's very linear and up and to the right all the time and everything's always amazing. I know that you've been kind of quite open with some of the challenging moments of sort of Hnry's journey, and I think you kind of mentioned previously that both of you at various stages have decided that you've had enough and you want to quit and leave, and then kind of 8 hours later you're back in the office. Can you again, for our listeners, can you share what some of those difficult moments have been for you, and how you and Claire have been able to sort of work through that by yourselves and for each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly in the early stages, I think when it's such a natural response, when your resilience is tested, Claire and I have only ever wanted to go out and do the right thing by our customers. And, there've been a couple of examples where we've had, I mean, I can't get into too much specific detail, but we've had, other third parties either lying about us publicly or trying to defame us or going to our customers and effectively trying to scam them into sort of not into sort of not engaging with Hnry anymore. And it really tests you to the point where I know both Claire and I have arrived at stages where we say, with so many people trying to tear us down out of either jealousy or because they just don't like who we are, why would we keep on doing this thing where you wake up to another fake Google review from a traditional accountant, or you wake up and find that some copycat competitor is trying to sort of take legal action against you for no reason, just to waste your money? And it's sort of, I think Claire and I have both had opportunities where we've sort of said, why are we doing this? And like, why are we carrying on? And both of us have kind of learned over the years with like building resilience, because you don't, when you first start a business like this, you never realize how much your resilience is going to get tested until you actually have to learn to come through these things. And the thing that has kept us going is actually hearing from our customers, and like the fact that if you want a shot in the arm, and we have our customer support staff are fantastic. They post all the nice comments we get from customers internally. And actually, that's just what really keeps you going, is when you see people say, this has literally changed my life. And they go, why didn't I do this earlier? Like, I was messing about with a limited liability company and a traditional accountant, whatever. Like, I've been using Hnry for a few months now, and it's an absolute game changer. And that for Claire and I is, in the pit of despair, when you're just like, we just got to jack this in, because, I can't carry on taking these knocks from people who don't understand what we do as a business, to just read those customer comments and go, that's why we do it. We do it because it's genuinely life-changing for people. And that's what helps you get up the next morning and go, okay, now we're gonna move on from this. And actually we're gonna succeed in spite of all the people who are trying to tear us down and who are lying about us and all this kind of stuff. And you go, actually, we're going to rise above that, because the thing that keeps us going is the tens of thousands of customers that are out there going, I love this thing, and you've created something that really brings a lot of value to me. And I remember, and you can bleep. I'm surprised I haven't sworn yet on this podcast, and you can bleep this out if you want. But I remember a while ago we had Vinny Pooji from Left Lane, one of our investors and board members, was over in our Australian office doing. We sort of had an open house and a bit of a Q&A, and he was talking about their investment thesis and saying actually one of the things that they like to invest in is what they call oh fuck problems, which is effectively where someone has solved a problem to such an extent that if they ever went away, their customers will go, oh, fuck, what am I going to do now? There isn't an adequate replacement. This thing is such at the pinnacle of what I wanted that I'm actually going to be really despondent that I don't have an alternative to that. And that's what keeps us going, is actually for so many tens of thousands of people, they're like, oh, fuck, what would I do without Hnry? This is such a lifeline for me. And there isn't anything out there that is comparable, either from a service perspective or a quality perspective or a feature set perspective or a price perspective. And so in those low moments where Claire and I have our resilience tested, that's always the thing we keep coming back to, is actually we can't not do this, because actually a lot of people rely on this for not just their financial sanity, but their mental sanity as well. And actually it brings so much value to people who potentially wouldn't have be able to earn with such confidence. And when you realize that this is not about like coining it in and try and screw over customers to make the most amount of money. It's not about like scamming people. It's actually, we're here to help people. And that's all we've ever tried to do. We're trying to price fairly, help people, help them go out and earn independently. And when you're so focused on that mission, it's actually become easier to get up in the morning when your resilience gets tested, because you have 10,000 people or more behind you going, you've got to get up, because we all want this to continue, and there's no viable alternative. And that's that's a big motivator. When you think about a few years ago, it would have been 10,000 customers. It's probably, I don't know, 10 times that now. There's a lot of voices that you can look at in the morning that are coming in through the chat, which are all really positive, that you go, okay, that's why we do it.
Yeah, love that. And on that note, James, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your experience and insights. For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, they can check us out at hnry.com, hnry.com, or .co.nz or .com.au. We have them all. If you fat finger it and you go to horny.com.au, we're there as well. Unfortunately, it's just tax. It's nothing else. But yeah, come and talk to our team. We're not faceless SaaS software. We love chatting to customers. We like answering questions. come and check us out. I think, for a lot of people, they wonder whether it's too good to be true. And for us, it's great to be able to have people come along and really have an enjoyable service.
Yeah, amazing. We'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes. I'm not sure about whether we'll include horny.com, but we'll add the other ones anyways. James, once again, thanks so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to episode 210 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.